And we have with us Tom Clements, longtime nuclear activist, working with Greenpeace, Friends of the Earth, and now with the Alliance for Nuclear Accountability. He is the non-proliferation coordinator.
Tom Clements, and as he said, I work for the Alliance for Nuclear Accountability, and I'm based here in Columbia. But the Alliance for Nuclear Accountability is an organization with about 35 member groups around the country, and we focus on the Department of Energy, both at the sites that David presented and other sites, and in Washington. And I'm going to focus on the Savannah River site, which is a real mess here in the state of South Carolina and remains an integral part of the nuclear weapons complex. Which is the
Is it working for you? There you go.
Okay, this is just a sign. I'm just curious, how many people know about the Savannah River site or what it is? So a lot of you, this young lady in the middle and the back knows about Savannah River site. Savannah River site is a key Department of Energy facility. You can see here, David mentioned it earlier, Savannah River site over by Aiken, south of Aiken, mostly in Aiken County, is 310 square miles. And, I can't do that. About 5,000 people were moved out, and a number of communities were moved. And they bulldozed all the houses, and they rapidly built nuclear reactors starting in 1952. And this is the earlier Department of Energy weapons complex. A couple of these sites are now closed, including Rocky Flats. Savannah River site sent plutonium to Rocky Flats, which made the trigger, the core of nuclear weapons. Just another location. So it's over 100 miles upstream from Savannah, Georgia, and a lot of people get confused about that, but it's totally in the state of South Carolina. And Susan briefly mentioned the Vogtle nuclear reactors. It's not by mistake that they are located right across the river from Savannah River site, because there was no population after it was removed to complain against those reactors. So there are two new reactors under construction by Georgia Power. And just to show you, this is the map of the earthquake zone. Here in the southeast, you may have heard of the Charleston earthquake in the late 1880s. The nuclear reactors in the state and the Savannah River site and Plant Vogtle across the river, they're all vulnerable to seismic risk. Yes, 1886. That was a massive earthquake that basically destroyed Charleston. Savannah River site is managed by companies that are key to military production. Honeywell, Fluor Corporation, Newport News Nuclear, under the banner of an entity called Savannah River Nuclear Solutions. And there's still about 10,000 employees out at the Savannah River site. Just to show you a map of the site itself, these letter designations are the areas where different things took place. The triangles are the nuclear reactors. So there were, and I'll show you in a second, there were 5 nuclear reactors. Cooling water was dumped, hot cooling water with no treatment whatsoever was either dumped into this lake or into these streams right here. So there were no cooling towers whatsoever, because the Department of Energy was not under any regulation and still is not under any regulation. It's a self-regulating agency. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission does not regulate activities. Aiken, South Carolina would be up where AT is or something like that. It's about 15 miles from the border of the site. And again, those Vogtle reactors are somewhere right here on this side of the river. The Savannah River site budget, you can see it's massive, and you got to multiply this times all these other DOE sites. $2.43 billion request in fiscal year 2011, plus the so-called Recovery Act, $1.6 billion. And one of the untold stories about the Recovery Act, not only here in South Carolina at the Savannah River site, but nationwide, I forget what the total was, but maybe $800 billion. The contractor that I pointed out before, Savannah River Nuclear Solutions, they took 20% right off the top of that. If you've ever seen anything written about the contractors' administrative fees of all that money, that's the scandal that has never been reported. And Savannah River Nuclear Solutions made a huge profit off big government with that Recovery Act. The request last year, $2.48 billion, and it's broken down into cleanup and National Nuclear Security Administration, which is the weapons part of the Department of Energy. So the Department of Energy, is the Department of Energy really an energy department? No, I claim it's a Department of Nuclear Weapons and a Department of Military Waste, left over from making plutonium and other things for nuclear weapons. So you can see the breakdown of the budget, and this holds true now. About a third of that budget is dedicated to nuclear weapons. Some of this is reimbursed from the Pentagon, but the main role of the Department of Energy is nuclear weapons related. And that's another thing that needs to change in this country. We don't have a Department of Energy. It's a sad state of affairs, but Republicans and Democrats alike, particularly Lindsey Graham here in South Carolina, they want to keep this status quo because the contractors are making a lot of money. Here are the list of the 5 reactors at the site, when they operated and when they were shut down. So we're left with 5 nuclear reactors. This is one of them. That reactor now is storing research reactor spent fuel, but 2 of the reactors have now been basically filled with concrete. It's called in situ decommissioning, and this is what I think is going to happen with nuclear power reactors. What they did was they knocked down a lot of this infrastructure. Anything standing, there was some other discharge. There was a storage pool for the spent fuel coming out of it where the plutonium came from. It's all been filled with concrete. All the above ground doors, anything has been sealed off. That reactor's open, but the P and the R reactor, they're called, they're going to be there for infinity. I went to the closing ceremony about 1.5 years ago. These things are basically like that. And you know, think 1 million years from now, what is going to be at this site where there are 5 of these reactors that were dedicated to human beings making nuclear bombs back during the Cold War. So this is going to be with us forever. To produce the plutonium, I think I skipped over the slide, or maybe it's coming up. This is a plutonium button. Savannah River site produced about 35 metric tons of plutonium. You can pass this around if you want to. Close up of one of the reactors, and also a waste tank. If you pass these. Savannah River site produced about 35 metric tons of plutonium. Hanford site in Washington produced maybe 65 metric tons. So it was these 2 sites that had a key role in producing nuclear weapons for the Cold War, and that stockpile that's still maintained. There's a picture of the plutonium button. You can actually handle plutonium, and this is just in a plastic bag. Because of the nature of the radiation, you can handle it, but if you ingest it, it's carcinogenic, very, very deadly. And this material was shipped to that Rocky Flats site in Colorado, where they formed plutonium spheres, which are called the triggers. And I would highly recommend a book to you. I think it's called Full Body Burden. It's about Rocky Flats, just came out.
Yeah.
Stunning story, personal story of a girl who grew up near downwind from the site. Plutonium is very flammable in oxygen, and downwind from the site towards Denver, there was a lot of plutonium exposure. And the book is a great read. I just finished it. In order to produce plutonium, you take these rods out of a reactor, you dissolve them in nitric acid, and it goes into high-level waste tanks. You can see a better picture coming around. This is the top of one of the 1-million-gallon tanks. And according to the Department of Energy, and the South Carolina Department of Health and Environmental Control affirms this as well, that the radioactive waste stored in SOx tanks pose the single greatest environmental risk to the state of South Carolina. This was from a couple of years ago, but I heard it again about 2 months ago when DHEC actually stated that again. Because if this high-level waste leaks into the groundwater, it could contaminate the groundwater in the Savannah River, and there's also a risk of these big tanks exploding because hydrogen is generated in the tanks. There's less of an explosion risk here, versus the Hanford site, which is out in Washington, because there's a more toxic brew of materials in the 177 tanks they have out there. Just a little bit more about the tanks. 4 of them have now been evacuated of most of the radioactive material, which means there's high-level waste left in them, some, and they filled them with concrete. That's what tank closure means. So all these tanks are going to be filled with concrete eventually and left in place. The steel is going to degrade over a couple thousand years, and there's high-level waste still left in them, residual amounts. But this is another legacy of the Cold War right here in South Carolina, is the high-level waste in these tanks. This is to show you, this is one of the production areas. Massive complexes out at Savannah Riverside, and few people seem to remember about it anymore. The waste goes into tanks in what they call farms. There's 2 main farms, and they have about 25 tanks each. These are some of the tanks before they were filled to the top with soil, so you can only see the top of the tanks, so they can stick probes down into them now to measure radiation and pump the waste around. More of them under construction. And these tanks from the 1950s, made out of carbon steel, a lot of them are leaking or have cracks in them. So they draw the waste down below the cracks, but there's still a risk that there could be larger cracks. This is just inside of one of the tanks. This is you can see why they have a problem cleaning them out remotely, because this is deadly. They can't get all the waste out of there. Those are cooling coils inside the tank and support columns. They're going to leave all that stuff, fill a thing to the brim with concrete, walk away from it. There's sludge, like a peanut butter mixture at the bottom, and a salt material. They're mobilizing this. They're taking it over to a waste treatment plant and turning it into large canisters. And I think I got a picture of that. But a large amount of this volume is going to be pumped into, you can see these 2 tanks here, and more under construction. A large portion of the waste is going to be mixed with concrete and poured in these tanks and just left. Original plan was to build about 60 of these tanks, but it was too expensive. These are like 2 or 3 million gallons. They're going to build 30 million gallon tanks now. 30 million gallon tanks to mix some of the high-level waste with. It's had cesium removed, most of the cesium. Mix it with concrete. They're going to cap that over and leave it forever. This is the facility that's taking the high-level waste in those tanks, mixing it into big containers, and solidifying it, which is a good thing, because you need to get the waste out of the tanks. They've got 2 storage facilities. They want to build another one, and the one they're having, instead of building another facility, they just want to stick them outside and put them in containers. These are those high-level waste canisters before they're filled. As Susan said, if you put a nuclear fuel rod, spent rod in this room, we'd all be dead. If you walked up to one of these containers with vitrified, glassified high-level waste in it, touched it, walked away, you get a lethal dose of radiation. So this is very deadly stuff. This material, like spent nuclear fuel on the commercial side, was also destined for Yucca Mountain or a geologic repository. So we do need to find some place to take it, because it's not a good place leaving it on top of the sandy soils. Now, Savannah Riverside made the plutonium for nuclear weapons, but it also was the site that produced tritium, which is a radioactive gas. Those 5 reactors were capable of producing tritium, and Savannah Riverside processed that tritium, and this is a new facility that processes all the tritium that goes in all the nuclear weapons. So we have a nuclear bomb factory here in South Carolina called the Savannah Riverside. It used to be called the bomb plant. It's still the bomb plant. This is another site, tritium extraction facility. The tritium is now produced in a nuclear reactor owned by the Tennessee Valley Authority, a commercial reactor, but now it's a bomb reactor. This is so-called tritium reservoir. They put the gas in this. This is produced out of the Kansas City plant that Dave mentioned.
How big is that?
It's classified. I don't know. That picture, there's no scale on it. And you can't get that picture much anymore. That's pre-9/11. You can find some now. But somewhere or other, that tritium reservoir goes into that the nuclear weapons package, and they inject it or they fill it with tritium at Savannah River. They ship it out to all the nuclear weapons sites, and they inject it before the explosion goes off, and it boosts the explosive power of a fission weapon, and it makes a thermonuclear weapon, the hydrogen bomb, possible. And tritium is radioactive hydrogen, basically. So the rods from which the tritium is made They're rods that go in a nuclear power reactor in Tennessee. They're made here down on Bluff Road at the Westinghouse nuclear fuel plant that makes uranium fuel. So not only do we have a nuclear bomb plant in South Carolina called the Savannah River Site, we have a nuclear bomb facility here in the city of Columbia. How many of you knew that? How many knew you had a nuclear bomb plant here in Columbia, South Carolina? This young lady in the back knew that. She's astute. She's heard it before. But that really blows me away. Have you ever seen anything written about that we have a nuclear bomb factory here in Columbia? No. Have you ever read that Savannah River Site, a key cog in the nuclear bomb complex, is right here in South Carolina? No. You don't read about this. So you might speculate there's some kind of cover-up going on. Okay, I'll go ahead and say it. There's some kind of cover-up. So plutonium, because there are weapons being retired, but the budget for retiring and taking apart the nuclear weapons was cut last year. We've got all these nuclear weapons that need to be taken apart, but instead they want to rebuild the nuclear weapons complex, and they're cutting the budget to take the weapons apart. But what do you do with the plutonium from the weapons? So in 1994, the National Academy of Sciences wrote this report on plutonium disposition, and Savannah River Site has a key role here. So basically 50 metric tons of plutonium out of 100 has been declared surplus. That's a good thing. All these sites had some role in handling plutonium or producing it. Right now, a lot of the dismantled weapons, it takes place at Pantex site near Amarillo, and that's where a lot of the cores of the nuclear weapons are stored. I think there's maybe 13,000 of these cores in bunkers out there. And these are the nuclear weapons design facilities, Los Alamos and Lawrence Livermore. Savannah River Site now has about 13 metric tons of weapons-grade plutonium stored in one of those old reactors, not the L reactor. That was a picture of the L reactor earlier, but in the K reactor. These are the cans in which they're stored, and they're just small cans. The amount of plutonium in each of those cans is classified, but it's probably on the order of 1.5 kilos, something like that. They're stacked up, you wouldn't believe it, they're stacked up in rooms like this to the ceiling. And there's hardly enough room for the forklifts to get through. There's so much plutonium packed in there. So we got to do something with this stuff. And the proposal is to make a nuclear fuel out of it. So they're building a factory at Savannah River Site to make what's called mixed oxide fuel. There's some more information about it, but they tested some of this in Duke's Catawba reactors here in South Carolina, and the testing didn't work out. So Duke has dropped out of the project in 2008. The Russians said they were going to use plutonium fuel made from weapons, but they've stopped looking at their so-called light water reactors, but they're looking at this BN600 and this BN800 that's being constructed. These are what are called breeder reactors. They're sodium cooled, they can make more plutonium. So the United States wants to get rid of the plutonium. They're doing it in concert with Russia, but we're enabling them to build a reactor, the BN800, which can produce weapons-grade plutonium. It doesn't make any sense. And the State Department is pitching this, oh, we got a plan to get rid of plutonium. We don't. I've been in the control room of that reactor, and I can tell you it was scary. It was before 9/11. There was I had my backpack with me, and all of the other Westerners did too. They didn't even check us. Didn't even inspect anything. So we walked into the control room, into the first entranceway, and it's like, does anybody have a pistol on them? Because we can melt this reactor down. And it's like, I don't feel comfortable here. I mean, it was inside the reactor too, but it was supposedly we were the first Westerners. So the portal to check for metal and stuff was broken. So we just walked around. You know, it was like walking into the reactor. It was crazy. So they want to use plutonium in Tennessee Valley Authority, TVA's reactors. And 3 of the 5 reactors they want to use as plutonium fuel in are the GE Mark I exploding reactors. Fukushima style. And the spent fuel, as you may recall, is stored on the upper floors of this design. Now, we don't have them in South Carolina, but there are 2 in North Carolina, 2 in Georgia. This was where the cooling water comes from. The whole scheme didn't work. So they want to introduce weapons-grade MOX fuel, never been used before, reactor-grade MOX, so lower quality has been used, into TVA's Browns Ferry. And I happened to be outside the gate at Browns Ferry a few weeks ago taking photographs, and it turns out the security people didn't like that. And I instructed them what I'm doing is totally legal. So they held me for about 15 minutes and they said, yeah, you can take pictures. But they're sensitive, and they should be, about the safety of these reactors, whether they have mixed oxide fuel stored on the site, which is, when it's unirradiated, it's weapons material. This is just a picture of these Mark 1s and the Mark II reactors. So there was a hearing about using mixed oxide fuel up near the reactors about 2 weeks ago. Nobody spoke in favor of this. But this is DOE's disposition plan to stick this kind of fuel, which is more dangerous, into these old reactors. Okay, I need to move on, but there's a whole bunch of things related to the MOX program at Savannah Riverside, but the main one is the MOX fuel fabrication facility. They're building a $7 billion facility. Dave put up cost of all of these other big projects replacing nuclear weapons facilities. This one, the price tag was reported at $5 billion up until about 2 weeks ago, and some information leaked out. Now it's $7 billion. Now who's happy with that? The companies that are building it are very happy. The higher the price, the better. And who's protecting this? Lindsey Graham. Senator Lindsey Graham, so-called fiscal conservative. But he's a big government guy that's spending our money on useless projects, unfortunately.
Joe Wilson is too.
And Joe Wilson's protecting it because his district now includes Aiken and Savannah Riverside. So these big government Republicans are who are doing this in large part, and around the other DOE sites too. So dispose of plutonium as waste. I calculate, based on DOE figures, it's about 3.4 billion. I don't have 17.5 billion is what I calculate for this MOX program. It's a big government boondoggle, and we are starting to get traction in Congress questioning this from real fiscal conservatives, from Republicans who are questioning the cost. This is a picture in 2010 when the plant was being built from another article. Okay, and I want to just get into the spent fuel storage issue, and I'll wind this up. I've passed out a letter, and Susan touched on this. What are we going to do with spent fuel? If there's no Yucca Mountain anymore, there's no place to take it. So the Blue Ribbon Commission gave a report to Congress, to the White House and DOE earlier this year, and they recommend, this was a GAO report, but consolidated storage sites. And the Savannah River site is a perfect target. They said one or more consolidated storage sites, and we have entities here in South Carolina that are already moving to make South Carolina a spent fuel dump. They're doing this because they want the fuel here to reprocess it to get plutonium out to use in imaginary futuristic reactors. There's already been experiments in the U.S. with reprocessing, including West Valley, New York, and I've been to that site, it's a mess. Morris, Illinois, never opened, and the Barnwell plant here in South Carolina. That's Barnwell as it stands today. President Carter basically closed that reprocessing plant down. If he had not, we would be the spent fuel dump of all the country's spent fuel and high-level waste. Luckily, we're not. I got arrested right by that Agnes sign many years ago. So Areva, French government-owned company, socialists. These people are socialists, nuclear socialists. European, they are building the MOX plant at Savannah Riverside. They claim if you take the plutonium out, it's just all one big circle. It just goes around and around. The problem is, and this isn't a great image, but they forget all the waste. So they call it recycling. It's green, it's nice, it's clean, but it's not. And we've seen that from all those high-level waste tanks at Savannah Riverside. Reprocessing is dirty. So they're talking about an energy park at Savannah Riverside, which would have reprocessing in it. They're talking about, this was a presentation to the Savannah Riverside Citizens Advisory Board. Spent nuclear fuel storage. They've already been talking about this a few years ago. This is a quote from a guy who works for the contractor at the risk of being exiled from Aiken. The answer is yes, or if you're looking at spent fuel storage, there's a thing called Enterprise SRS. They've taken the logos down from Savannah Riverside. You don't see the government logo anymore. You see Enterprise SRS. It's a consortium of the Department of Energy, Savannah Riverside, and the contractors. It's kind of like a stadium being named, you know, for a big company. I don't know, what's an example? I can't think right now.
BOA.
Bank of America Stadium.
Bank of America Stadium. We got Enterprise SRS DOE Complex. Brought to you by Savannah River Nuclear Solutions, which is Honeywell, Fluor, Newport News Nuclear. They have great plans for the site. They want to get spent fuel here. They want to reprocess it. They want to build small modular reactors called GE Prism. Doesn't exist. You stick the plutonium in it. It's great recycling. So they're looking for all sorts of schemes. And we're in the crosshairs. I want to read you this. I just got some information under Freedom of Information Act. And I'll close on this. This is from the head of the Governor's Nuclear Advisory Council. Got an email, this is dated April 4th this year. Got an email last night from Carolina Nuclear Cluster leadership asking what the governor's position on interim storage is. I will tell them the staff is collecting information preparatory to a position decision. While Aiken is focused on DOE hosting the facility on the SRS and those implications, I think industry in the state is considering the possibility of a private storage facility that charges either the utility or DOE, depending on how the fuel title is managed, for storage and maintenance. Could be quite lucrative. And if I made the casks, would consider it the perfect side business. Low overhead, high return. This is the head of our Nuclear Advisory Council that advises the governor of South Carolina. They are champing at the bit because they want to get rich off dumping spent fuel on us here in South Carolina. And we have started pushing back. Sierra Club, conservation voters, coastal Coastal Conservation. We have all, and legal women voters, we have come out against it. There's been articles in the paper, the Spartanburg paper, the Rock Hill paper editorialized against bringing spent fuel here. You can do your part by signing that letter, printing your name and printing your address and addressing the envelope with your return on it. We've gotten some of these into her before. If you signed one before, I'd say do it again. If you're from North Carolina, send it in anyway, please. And I'll leave it there, but the main message is we're at risk of being a plutonium dump. We need to find alternatives to disposing of plutonium rather than plutonium fuel because the project is not going to go forward, in my opinion. And we're at great risk of becoming the nation's spent nuclear fuel dump, but I think that we, the people, and other entities are going to stop this. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
So, we've just thrown a lot of material at you, and I'm sure there are questions out there. Well,
I'll pay for the stamps on this.
Yeah, so return the letters to Tom before you leave. I'm going to circulate this clipboard for Carolina Peace if you're interested in getting another email. It's only weekly, and it's about what Carolina Peace is up to. That'll be going through the audience, and I'll come down, and our panelists are right here. So what are your questions? We have one from Claire, so go ahead.
Well, just when you were speaking, David, you were talking about we have too many weapons, and deterrence. We don't need that many for deterrence. Do we need any? Are you for reducing nuclear weapons or abolishing nuclear weapons?
Well, right now, I think you have to take the step of reducing before you can get to abolition. It's a multilateral process, and no one's asking one country to say, oh, we're just going to get rid of all of our nuclear weapons, and everybody else is going to have nuclear weapons. It's got to be a process where all the countries agree to get rid of their nuclear weapons. So it's always a gradual multilateral process. But I think if you don't reduce, the ideal is there, and you've got to get to your ideal. And I do think that at one point that we can get to nuclear abolition where people will see that it's not necessary.
Thank you.
Tom?
Two comments. During the height of the Cold War, we were told that the Soviets could destroy us 11 times with their nuclear weapons, but we shouldn't worry because we could destroy them 35 times. Now, the levels of nuclear weapons are less than that now, but maybe putting this in terms of how many times each side could be destroyed might help wake up the public. And the other comment is that plutonium has a half-life, or some forms of it have a half-life of 24,000 years. My understanding is to find out how long that waste is dangerous, you multiply it by either 10 or 20, which means it's dangerous for 250,000 to 500,000 years. And some forms of uranium, I understand, have a half-life of over 3 billion years.
Depleted uranium has a half-life 4.5 billion, which is ridiculous. So, I mean, it's past what a humans will experience as well. It's close to eternal.
Managing this nuclear waste, I think, would be probably more expensive than the cost, the value of the electricity derived from nuclear power. And
Yeah.
I haven't seen any figures projecting the cost, which would be interesting. Also, I used to teach history. Just managing it for that amount of time, we have trouble managing things for 30 or 40 years.
Yeah.
True.
And I don't know of many governments that have lasted 1,000 years, and I can't think of any government that went for more than 100 years at a time, if that, without major disturbances and so
Even if we dedicated all of the world to that cause. Oh, you want to answer?
What they're doing is they're supposedly charging the utilities pay in a certain amount into a nuclear waste fund. And that fund was going to be used to build Yucca Mountain and permanent geologic repositories. And we did indeed spend a lot of money on Yucca Mountain, and that's why, but now it's not functional. That's why the utilities are now suing the federal government for breach of contract, because they were supposed to take this waste off of their hands. But the ultimate result of it was supposed to be like what they're doing in Finland, which is to build a deep geologic repository in some location that has been stable for, as best as geologists can tell, for at least 1 million or so years, and put this stuff in there. And then we wouldn't really have to manage it, supposedly. I mean, it looks good on paper, right? The Finns are the farthest along of anybody. There's a great movie out there called Into Eternity. You can get it from Netflix. You should watch it. They're taking 100 years to build this place and spending a huge amount of money for a relatively small amount of nuclear waste that they have. But the plan was to take that waste and put it somewhere where we wouldn't have to manage it. Hopefully, if we can find a location that is stable and secure from the biosphere. And the rest of the waste, things like cesium, iodine, those have relatively short half-lives, where in a couple hundred years, they're pretty much gone, you know, as long as we don't keep making it. But it's the long-lived things that are going into that we have to worry about, that would be going into the geologic repository. So but the other part of the problem is we spend a lot of that money now, and they're trying to take some of that waste money that's being put aside for the geologic repository and use it for interim storage. And a lot of us have been speaking out against that, because we don't want it to be used for interim storage, because we want them to get busy finding this mythical new Yucca Mountain, wherever it may be. We don't know where it is, but they need to get busy finding it, because by the time they actually find it and build it, we're going to actually need 2 of them. Because even if Yucca had opened when it was supposed to open, it would have been full immediately with the waste that we already have, because 70% was commercial, 30% was weapons, plutonium. So they're going to have, originally they were going to build 3, they're going to have to keep building these things if we're going to keep using nuclear power. So you're right, it is kind of insane, and who knows what the ultimate cost. I think you hit on something, that the cost of the electricity is never going to be as, you know, be a value as much as we're going to spend on all the waste stuff. So I'm sure of it.
Coleman?
There may have been some other hands up before me, but
Was there any
I
other?
definitely want to get something in a minute. Okay, I'm in Western North Carolina, as is Claire, and my friend Alan's also from North Carolina. So my brothers and sisters in South Carolina. I mean, what do y'all project as the collective strategy to end this? Because I mean, you're in South Carolina, you're focusing on this stuff here in SRS, nasty business. Before they moved the potential repositories to Nevada, they studied 10 or 11 places in the Appalachians, and they come back. So they might choose you to come and dump it all here and sit on it, but if they reprocess it, the closest pre-studied repository site that they're looking at potentially is about 20-30 minutes outside of Asheville, up in like Madison County. It's one of them.
Sandy Mush.
So, between Sandy Mush and Hot Springs and that area, Madison County. If they do that, y'all get it, but we get, Asheville is the nuclear crossroads. You got 40 and 26 coming through there if you weren't aware of it, projected over 20 years, 10,000 loads of, high-level waste coming in. I mean, what is it? A flatbed truck is worth 4 barn wells. A rail car is worth 16 barn wells. There's estimated 240,000 times the measurable radioactivity headed your way that's already been buried here. It's coming. So, I mean, we've got like Atomic Appalachia, all those things, the Oak Ridge, the depleted uranium plants up in northeastern Tennessee, Irwin, Tennessee. They just had a big sinkhole open up in Irwin. I don't know if y'all are aware of that.
A big
About 26, 30 feet across, 120 feet deep. Irwin, Tennessee is a nuclear fuel service. It's really nasty, another big nasty place up there. They did the dye trace, and the dye ended up in the sludge pond over at Irwin, up at MFS. But the point was, the question in here is like, what is our collective strategy? Y'all are head on this part. What are we doing in North Carolina? We're trying to back it up, but whether or not we can answer that tonight, we need that.
What's going to happen
strategy.
with the new Congress, whoever's in, is there's already a bill now to set up consolidated storage, and it creates per the recommendations of this Blue Ribbon Commission, sets up an entity that look at finding new geologic sites. So this process, it's my feeling that there's going to be new legislation introduced right off the bat. So it will set up a new entity apart from DOE.
Mm-hmm.
It will authorize consolidated storage. It will
Public-private entity.
begin whatever. It will begin the pursuit of geologic sites.
Yeah.
So that's where the action is going to be on that, and that's in the entities that want geologic disposal site or a consolidated storage site, like the companies here. They're going to be feeding into that and supporting it. There was a bill introduced by Senator Bingaman. There was a hearing on it a few weeks ago, on the 12th, I think, and it's established consolidated storage, but the Republicans had wanted reprocessing in it, but that wasn't in there. So we could see reprocessing authorized, but all of this is going to get kicked off with the new Congress.
The main thing is to keep an eye out on this process, because supposedly it's supposed to be a consent process where the state would agree, but the problem is it what part of the state, Is it just the part of the state that stands to benefit from economically? Like, would it just be the Aiken people? Would that be considered the only community that has input into this consent? What does this consent process look like? Does it just mean the governor signs off? I mean, the governor has got to factor into this, because when they picked Yucca Mountain, they did it over the objections of the governor. The governor fought Yucca Mountain of Nevada, and they forced it on him. So I think they've been a little bit sensitized, hopefully, although I'm not sure, that they're going to have to go through the governor. So that's one of the reasons that I think it's
That's good
important
news for us,
to
right?
flood the governor's office, right? But you know what? She's going to have to run in 2 years, right? And I think it's important that she hear that there's a lot of people are saying, hell no, we won't let this come here. So,
The Bingaman bill gave the governor of the state and the local political entity total control over siting these facilities.
she's not going to be able to run if she let us become the replacement.
Or in
for
North
Mountain.
Carolina, so you got to get to your governor, but,
Yeah.
so I look at Savannah Riverside here. There's a little town called New Ellington.
Uh-huh.
Ellington was moved off the site. So are they giving New Ellington, authorization under this federal legislation to control what happens? Or is it going to be Aiken County? Aiken County will probably try to grab it. But that's ridiculous that the governor, if the governor's in cahoots with the people that want to dump, and the local entity decide for the whole state, that's what we really have to push back on the state level against that. If you got a bad governor, and maybe you do.
More questions, wonderments?
Just a
statements?
quick question. Do you guys know of any literature, like books or blogs or something that I could read about the sort of like the profiteer or profiting side of the waste management aspect of the complex? Any books or anything like that off the top of your head?
See, the high level waste is all being managed by the federal government.
Right.
The only waste that's privately being managed is the quote unquote low level waste.
But private companies manage the DOE sites. Really, there's not been a lot written about all the contractors there. I've been approached by this. There's a group that's trying to get together to investigate all the contractors that are making money off of nuclear waste. But there's really not good stuff written about it. People ask me about this.
From what I understand, I mean, waste management is almost an industry all on its own, right? Nuclear waste management,
Mhm.
all these contractors.
There's big companies out there, yes.
Okay.
Energy solutions.
There's a lot of low level waste. I guess volume-wise, there's a lot more low-level waste coming out, which is just waste that has less plutonium concentrated. It still has all the nasty stuff in it, it's just in lower concentrations. And they're allowed to call it low-level, because there might only be 1 part of plutonium and 100 parts of something else instead of 10 parts plutonium. So there's a lot of that low-level waste stuff that's out there that's being trucked around and burned and stuck out in Utah. There's still stuff coming to Barnwell. We take the low-level waste from Connecticut, New Jersey. It's still being dumped in our state.
Are you a student?
Yep. Not here.
But-
Sounds like a
so,
great research project.
Yeah, really good research
This comes up
project,
all the
yeah.
time. We really need to expose these profiteers of nuclear waste.
And there's people burning this stuff in
Yes,
Tennessee. I
Tennessee.
mean, can you imagine how
Yes.
6
crazy that
incinerators
is?
in
They're
Tennessee.
burning this radioactive
And Richland,
waste.
Washington.
Yeah, I mean, there's an
Where
entire,
the incinerator is.
There's an incinerator.
there's an entire decommissioned reactor from Michigan that's buried in the middle of Tennessee.
We have whole reactors buried in Barnwell.
Good question, no good answer.
Yeah, we have whole reactor vessels buried in Barnwell.
Low level.
Well,
Okay, Scott has his hand raised, he hasn't asked a question yet, and then I'll go to you, Tom.
Okay, I was just wondering if Tom could be like a little bit more clear about like the, like sort of like the political pressure points on this. Like right now, we're gonna like draw attention to the governor's, you know, through the letters to the governor, but like who is approachable and like to what extent sort of like public disobedience should be part of like whatever happens when the next Congress comes in?
Well, it's going to depend on the legislation that's passed in Congress, and we're going to have to lobby members up there. But on the state level, I would guess that, as they've done in the past, they're going to go to the state legislature to try to get the legislature to say that bringing spent fuel here is a good idea. So there'll be a lot of opportunities if that happens to lobby on the state house level. But that's not coming. I would imagine they're going to try to lay low as much as possible. I think the letters we've written and the editorials in the Spartanburg and Rock Hill papers against bringing spent fuel have already had an impact. So I think we just need to carry on building
The Governor's
alliances.
Nuclear Advisory Council meets like every other month, and it has a public part at the end. You can sit there all day long. It's about 3 hours. But it's actually kind of interesting.
4
It's
hours.
4 hours. But at the end, they always have, time for people to just come up and just tell the Governor's Nuclear Advisory Council how you feel about something. It's a good place for people to show up and just say, whatever you're doing, just don't bring that stuff here.
That's where 5 groups
So,
spoke out about 3 weeks ago.
Yeah, it's a worthwhile forum.
And I think we scared them. We scared them because we'd already, without really a lot happening yet, we backed off, I think, the Governor's Nuclear Advisory Council. You can see what the head of it thinks. There's a lot of money to be made. But we need to keep the pressure up there in the legislature and Congress. We need to develop allies. I believe you heard of Senator Corson.
Yes, I'm actually
Running
his
against him,
opponent.
aren't you?
I am. I'm the Green Party candidate in South Carolina Senate 20.
Well, who's the head of the Senate will probably be an important person, or whoever's, elected otherwise.
Right.
Is
Well,
that the CAB president? No, I'm speaking.
Karen Pedersen?
That's who that was before.
Karen Patterson is the head of the Governor's Nuclear Advisory Council. She works for Tetra Tech, which does environmental impact statements from DOE. She lives in Aiken. And that body is trying to rubber stamp bringing spent fuel here to undermine transparency and consent, which are part of the recommendations. So we just need to keep after them. But I feel the conservation agenda, or common agenda, which is all the conservation groups, is probably on board. And as Susan likes to say, that represents 50,000 people statewide. So it's just the profiteers and special interests we're really targeted at. And I think we got a good chance to stop this on the base we already have. It's the other states that may be behind the curve, and we're kind of ahead of the game.
I would say, for the most part, most of our congressmen are rather worthless on this issue. They're pretty much either completely for, or they're not going to go against the other congressmen from the South Carolina's delegation. So that raises the question, well, maybe we need to complain to congressmen in other states and say, hey, we don't want to waste money on this and get stuck with this mess. Can you help us out by getting this canceled? And I think that's where you have to go. As far as I know, for congressmen in South Carolina, the only one that might be independent enough to actually, and serious about cutting the budget enough would be South Carolina number 5 congressional district, Mick Mulvaney, because he is very serious about cutting things. But then again, he would have to go against the rest of the congressional delegation from his state that wouldn't be happy with him if he said, well, you don't need that MOX plant, or I'm not for this nuclear thing. So I would definitely suggest finding out, send a letter to the editor to another state and say, hey, you guys need to cut this because our politicians here are not going to cut this. How about if you guys help cut this? Tom, your question.
I understand in the past there was a problem with a plan to take high-level waste and dilute it and call it low-level waste. Is that something we still have to worry about?
The solution
That's happening, but I don't track it enough, so I'm not sure where it stands, but I think that's moving forward.
That's an article.
There's different levels, A, B, and C of low-level waste, and they want to mix A with the higher levels so they can take it to the dump in Utah and Richland, Washington.
That's an article of faith at SRS. The solution to pollution is dilution. So one last burning question from somebody we haven't heard from, or we're going to let everybody go. Or one last burning question from somebody who we have heard from. You can ask a second, or a third.
Well, to what extent is so-called low-level nuclear waste being recycled into common household objects like pots and pans and belt buckles? And I've heard that that is happening.
I'm not an expert on that.
There is some of that going on.
Uh-huh.
I'm not an expert in that either, but I know that I think it's in Tennessee,
That's
they're
what I
doing
thought.
that, they're doing some,
But,
using it.
There's a vast amount of radioactive nickel at the old enrichment plant in Tennessee, so that's what they tried to get into the market. I think so far that's been held off. There have been various efforts over the years, but right now I don't think a lot is happening, but I'm not sure.
we did beat it back, I forget how many years ago.
Below regulatory concern back
Below,
in
that's
the
the term.
mid-90s.
And then Bed Bath & Beyond just had a recall of those little metal things you put over your tissues on the back of your toilet that was radioactive. Coming from somewhere.
One risk is
Jesus.
pacemakers and stuff like that.
Yeah.
This is not recycling into consumer products, but just yesterday in the Nuclear Regulatory Commission website, and I've seen this twice within the past 2 weeks, crematoria were contaminated because they incinerated the pacemakers. And it's not Atlantic Steel, but the steel company out here in Casey, CMC, they have had radioactive sources to go into the facility that were detected in the rail cars. And I've seen a couple of reports recently where radioactive sources that should have been managed some other way were just thrown in the trash. Those sometimes get recycled, but I think all these steel places do have radioactive detection devices, so to prevent that, it seems to me like they are diligent. I see a number of cases they shut down when they detect a source that shouldn't be in the scrap.
Thank you all for coming out. If you would like to get...
Yeah.
Thank
Yeah,
you very much.
very informative.